Hi, I'm Lorraine. And yes, my daughter kicked me off the family cruise. But that's not the worst part. They booked my yacht, branded it as theirs, toasted to a legacy built on a story I started, and they erased. They smiled for photos while telling people I didn't fit their image. But what happens when the woman they tried to hide shows up with the keys? Would you stay silent or take back the deck they renamed without you? I woke up to the sound of gulls and the smell of salt in the air, just like I had every morning since moving into my RV by the marina. The sea had become my routine, my rhythm. I poured my coffee, opened the back door, and let the breeze sweep in through the screen. Everything about that morning felt familiar, peaceful. That was until I heard the soft ping from my phone. It was from Callista. Mom, I think it's best you skip the cruise this year. It's for family members who've achieved. I didn't react right away. My eyes scanned the words over and over, thinking I missed something. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe she meant to send it to someone else. But the knot forming in my stomach told me the truth. My hand trembled slightly as I set the mug down. The coffee turned bitter, untouched. I didn't respond. Instead, I stared at the wall of the RV for a long moment. Then I grabbed my reading glasses and opened my email. A mutual friend had forwarded me Callista's latest blog post with a cheerful subject line, "Look at your daughter, killing it." I clicked. The title read, "How Letting Go of Outdated Family Expectations Empowered Me as a Leader." I already knew I wouldn't like what I saw. The piece started with some polished anecdote about choosing growth over guilt and redefining success outside inherited constraints. Then it happened. A sentence that gutted me in its casual cruelty. One of the hardest lessons, Callista wrote, is realizing that some people, even those closest to you, were never meant to come with you to the top. She never used my name. She didn't have to. The image was painted so clearly, a well-meaning but obsolete figure clinging to past values, holding her back. It was me, dressed in implication. I closed the laptop slowly, then sat in the silence of my RV. It was the kind of quiet that came not from peace, but from a sudden vacuum of recognition. The coffee had gone cold hours ago. I hadn't moved. On the shelf beside me was a photo frame, slightly dusty, showing Callista at age 12, arms wrapped around me at the old marina. She looked up at me like I had hung the moon. That version of her existed once, but somewhere along the way, she'd replaced it with this version, the one who'd rewritten me as a burden. Maybe I was outdated. Maybe I didn't fit into her world anymore. She had built her brand on minimalism and crisp fonts and TED Talks. I was handwritten letters and anchor tattoos and wooden wheels. Maybe I had become the background she didn't want in the shot. Still, guilt crept in like fog. Was I too small in her eyes because I hadn't gone corporate, hadn't remarried, hadn't moved up, only moved on? I opened the old photo album stored under the bench seat, flipping past vacations we never finished, birthdays she barely smiled through, and her college graduation, where I had clapped the loudest, though she barely glanced my way. No tears came, not then, just a hollow ache, the kind that takes residence quietly and refuses to leave. That afternoon, I walked along the docks. The wind tousled my hair, and I zipped up my light jacket, the one Richard used to love, the one with the faded patch that said Captain's Wife. He used to joke that it still made me look official. Richard had believed in slow, steady work. He used to say, "Any ship can sail calm waters, but legacy is built through the storms." A young dockhand waved as I passed. "Hey, Miss Lorraine, heard your daughter booked one of your yachts next week. Must be pretty proud." I paused just long enough that he looked uncertain. "Yes," I said, mustering a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Very." He nodded and turned away. I kept walking. That evening, I made dinner, but barely touched it. I washed the plate, dried it, and placed it back where it belonged. I didn't turn on the TV or play music. I simply sat, stared at my phone. The text still glowed on the screen, short, dismissive, final. I didn't type anything back. Instead, I powered off the phone and left it on the counter. If she wanted silence, she'd get it. But silence can be a storm too, and mine was just beginning. 2 days passed. The text still lingered in my phone, untouched, like a stain I couldn't wipe clean. I hadn't replied, hadn't mentioned it to anyone, but people have a way of telling you what they think you already know. My neighbor Gloria brought it up while watering her potted azaleas. "Heard Callista's hosting a big pre-cruise dinner at the waterfront grill tonight. Whole family's coming in early. Must be quite the gathering." She said it with a bright smile, expecting I'd nod with shared pride. I managed a soft, before retreating into my RV. It wasn't just that I hadn't been invited. It was the realization that I hadn't even crossed their minds as someone who should be, not just off the yacht, off the prelude, the build-up, the shared anticipation. This wasn't distance, it was deletion. That evening, I didn't bother with the TV. I sat in the dark, my laptop glowing as I scrolled through social media. The live stream appeared right there on Callista's page, auto-playing without sound at first. A panoramic shot of the outdoor terrace at the restaurant, the string lights twinkling overhead like a curated dream. White linens, white dresses, champagne flutes. Callista stood at the center, radiant, toasting a crowd of smiling relatives. "To legacy," she said, the audio finally clicking in, "and to the future we build when we stop dragging the past behind us." They clapped, laughed. Someone yelled, "Amen," to that. I paused it. The frame froze with Callista mid-laugh, and my cousin June leaning toward her with a hand on her shoulder, all teeth and approval. I closed the window and opened it again, watched it once more. This time I turned the volume down low and listened for the applause. It sounded like the erasure of an entire history. The next morning, still in my robe, I checked my messages and found a group photo posted by my niece. Everyone stood arranged like they'd rehearsed, symmetrical, sunlit, perfectly balanced. At the far end of the table was a chair that stood out, not empty, decorated. A delicate scarf tied around the back, the blue and cream pattern unmistakable, one I'd gifted Callista 5 Christmases ago. A conch shell rested on the seat cushion. No caption mentioned me, but I knew that had been my seat, my space, now dressed like a silent tribute and left vacant on purpose. A symbol. They didn't just forget me. They designed around my absence. And I sat there on the edge of my own bed, remembering when I used to be the one calling to make reservations, double-checking menus, covering deposits. When everyone deferred to me because I'd handled it for years. And now I wasn't even a footnote in their curated version of family. Callista's caption on the photo read, "Surrounded by love, grounded by legacy." The women who shape me, the journey that lifts me. I scrolled through the comments. "You're so lucky, Callista. This is the dream. Your family is everything. I clicked on a few profiles. Strangers who had no idea the woman who once steered the ship was now scrubbed from the log. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I thought about replying, posting my own photo, telling my side, but then I closed the tab. Truth doesn't need to yell when silence says more. Later that afternoon, I walked past the same docks where I used to teach Callista how to tie a cleat hitch. I ran my hand along a railing, smooth from sun and salt and memory. A younger staffer, maybe no older than 25, nodded at me in passing. Didn't know who I was, didn't ask. It was like watching a house I built get repainted in colors I didn't choose. As evening settled in, I went back to my RV, poured a glass of water, and sat without lights on. No TV, no music. Just the hush of the marina and the soft ping of a phone notification I ignored. Eventually, I stood, slipped on a sweater, and stepped back outside. The dock was quiet, the tide steady beneath the moonlight. I walked slowly, the wood creaking beneath each step. Not out of habit, not out of nostalgia, out of decision. If they left me out of the picture, I whispered to no one but the sea. Maybe it's time I changed the frame. The call with Trenton lasted 4 minutes and 13 seconds. I know because I counted. I remember how I waited until the sun dipped low enough to soften the glare on my windshield, as if that would somehow soften the words I'd hear too. When he picked up, his voice was hesitant, like he'd already practiced a script and was hoping I wouldn't interrupt. "Hey, Mom, I was going to call you. Just, things have been busy. I didn't waste time. Did you know about the cruise, the dinner?" A pause, then a slow exhale. "Yeah, I figured Callista would loop you in." She didn't. She looped me out. "It's complicated," he said. "You know how she is with appearances. It's her brand, and she's under pressure. She didn't mean anything personal. Leaving your mother off the guest list isn't personal." He went quiet again. "Look, Mom," he finally said, "I'm just trying to keep the peace. I don't want to be in the middle. I'm not asking you to take sides, Trenton. I'm asking you if you see me anymore." He didn't answer, and that said more than anything else could have. After the call ended, I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I sat in the corner of the RV, beneath the faded reading lamp that flickered when the power cord shifted wrong. 3 years ago at Thanksgiving, I'd been seated at a folding table in the sunroom. Callista had said the main table was for couples and key guests. I was neither. That night, I told myself it was a space issue. Now I knew better. There's a difference between being left out and being left behind. I got up slowly and pulled open the drawer under the bed, the one with the loose handle. From inside, I retrieved the small cedar box Richard had carved for me when we bought our first boat. I opened it gently, like it might still carry his warmth. Inside, wrapped in tissue and time, was a photograph. He and I, standing in front of the first Azure Majesty. The boat still had its factory lettering then, and I wore a windbreaker 2 sizes too big. His arm around me, my cheeks flushed with the sun and the pride of doing something bold. We had sold the house to fund it. Everyone called us foolish. We called it freedom. I remembered the day he handed me the wheel and said, "This isn't just going to carry people. It's going to carry something that outlives both of us." Legacy. He believed in it before Callista ever learned to spell the word. I placed the photo next to the window, the morning light casting a golden hue across our faces. I miss your quiet, I said out loud, and your certainty. I knew he wouldn't have stood for this, wouldn't have let them shame me out of my own story. I turned on my laptop and logged into the company dashboard. The charter schedule loaded slowly. My fingers hovered above the trackpad. There it was, 7-day private booking, departing next Thursday. Charter client, Callista Gaskins. I stared at her name like it was written in another language, like maybe it meant something different here than it did in the messages, the speeches, the posts, but it didn't. It meant she was standing on my deck, sailing with my staff, toasting on my timeline. She had erased me so cleanly. She forgot who held the deed. My jaw clenched, my shoulders squared. If they thought I was going to disappear quietly, they'd misread the map. They think they erased me, I whispered, staring at the name again. But they forgot whose signature is on that vessel's title. The morning breeze didn't taste as crisp as usual. I walked to the cafe on 5th, like I had dozens of times before, mostly for routine's sake, then the coffee. Roberta, the owner, was wiping down the outdoor tables when she spotted me. "Well, look who's famous by association," she chirped. "That article on your daughter, my goodness, what a yacht. You must be over the moon." I blinked, thrown. "Article?" She waved her phone. "It's been making the rounds, from daughter to CEO. Beautiful spread. They even mentioned the yacht. Gorgeous photos." My stomach dropped. I didn't remember speaking to any reporter. I hadn't approved any media use. I mumbled something about catching up later and headed straight back to the RV, coffee still clutched in hand. Back home, I pulled up the browser and typed Callista's name. It came up immediately, top of the feed, from daughter to CEO, Callista Gaskins takes the helm. The headline alone made me lean forward. The article had a glossy sheen, complete with sun-drenched photos of Azure Majesty, staged like a postcard. I scanned every paragraph, not a single mention of me. No nod to how the business began, no history, no acknowledgement that the yacht Callista stood on, posing in tailored white, had once been steered by my hands, built with my funds, kept alive by my effort. One caption caught my eye. Callista, overseeing staff aboard the Gaskins family yacht. My jaw tightened. The Gaskins family yacht, as though it had sprung from their lineage, not mine. As though the woman who once scrubbed its decks and argued over flooring samples didn't exist. I stared at the screen. I could almost hear her voice in my head, explaining how the public connects better with a simplified narrative. I could have commented. I could have emailed the journalist. I could have posted photos, receipts, contracts. But I didn't. Instead, I took a screenshot and saved it to a folder labeled Truth. If they were going to erase me from the credits, I'd at least keep the script. I sat back in the chair, heart thudding a beat louder than I cared to admit. The betrayal wasn't new, but seeing it polished into content made it sting like fresh salt water in an open cut. "They'll bury you if it fits their brand," I whispered. "But don't be surprised when you rise up with the proof." The next morning, I walked to the marina office. Amanda was out, but Peter, my assistant manager, greeted me with a furrowed brow. "Hey, Lorraine, so we got a formal request yesterday." I hung up my cardigan, already sensing the weight behind his words. "Callista's team wants to do a light remodel of Azure Majesty before the charter. New fixtures, change a few furnishings, nothing structural. Without notifying me, they sent it through as if they already had ownership clearance," he replied. "I flagged it. No action taken." "Good," I said calmly. "No changes. And Peter, Start logging every communication that comes from her team moving forward. He nodded. You want me to respond? No, let them think silence is agreement, I said, but we'll keep the ledger. Back in my RV, I poured myself a second cup of coffee, this one black and bitter. I sat at the tiny table near the window and opened the screenshot again. That same caption stared back at me. Callista overseeing staff aboard the Gaskins family yacht. I zoomed in. The background caught my attention. The railing of the upper deck was visible. I remembered staining it with Richard the summer before he passed. We used a blend called Driftwood Smoke. His pick said it made the vessel look ageless. I traced the edge of the railing on my screen with one finger and whispered, "You can Photoshop me out, but you can't fake the salt in my blood." They wanted to edit the narrative. I decided to rewrite the ending. It started like any other morning. Email, tea, the hum of dock workers in the distance. I hadn't expected anything to punch me in the gut before 9 a.m., but life has a way of landing its hardest hits when you least expect them. Peter had forwarded me a message by accident. He meant to flag it internally, but hit forward instead. The subject line made my stomach lurch before I even opened it. Rebranding proposal, As Your Majesty to Gaskins Legacy Cruise Experience. I clicked. Inside was a thread between Callista's PR agency and her marketing team. The contents were polished, manipulative, and nauseating. They discussed overhauling the yacht's visual branding, changing the lettering, repainting the signage, even replacing the embroidered napkins with monogrammed ones that read, Gaskins Legacy. As if the years I spent sanding decks and negotiating dock fees were a disposable backstory, they referred to the vessel as Callista's brand anchor. One line read, "This is her chance to own the full narrative. We suggest not referencing its prior ownership. It muddies the message. Prior ownership." I scrolled back up, read it all over again, slowly. No anger this time, no disbelief, just clarity, cold and precise. For months, I told myself she was too busy, too distracted, that all these omissions were unintentional. But this was deliberate. They weren't just leaving me out. They were repackaging me into non-existence. I stared at the screen, barely blinking. Richard's old saying came back to me, as clearly as if he'd whispered it. If someone writes you out of the script, become the director. That afternoon, I returned to the office, my stride sharper than usual. I didn't say much to the staff. I just opened my operations dashboard and clicked into the scheduling panel for As Your Majesty. There it was, Callista's name. 7-day charter, private, media on board. She thought she had orchestrated the entire production. I made some adjustments. First, I flagged the charter as sensitive. Then I looped in Captain Miller privately and requested a surprise inspection the day before departure. Next, I instructed our admin system to tag all inbound communication from Callista's team for my direct review. Any request, note, or message would now ping me immediately. This wasn't vengeance. This was record keeping. By late afternoon, I made my way down to the dock. The salt in the air hit sharper than usual, or maybe I was just breathing deeper. I spotted Greg, the ship manager, overseeing a new shipment of linens. He looked up as I approached and offered a polite nod. "Ms. Shipman, didn't expect to see you down here today." "Quick walk," I said, "but while I'm here, can we confirm all vessel documentation still lists me as sole owner?" He blinked. "Yes, ma'am, of course." And there are no pending approvals for name changes, exterior branding, or onboard presentation. No, ma'am, nothing's moved without your sign-off. Good, I replied. I had typed and printed that morning. Under no circumstances is this vessel to carry a name other than as your majesty. Not in signage, not in speech, not in ink. He skimmed the page. Crystal clear. Thank you, Greg, I said, and walked off without waiting for anything else. Back at the RV, I printed the email, the one Peter had mistakenly sent me, and slid it into a manila envelope. I wrote 2 words on the front in thick black ink. Opening night. Then I laid out my navy blazer, the one with the gold anchor pin Richard gave me when I launched the business. It still fit, still held shape. Next, my boat shoes, polished, ready. They wanted to turn my story into a platform for her performance. Let them bring the cameras. I'll bring the truth. 2 hours. That's how long I waited after they boarded. It wasn't to make a scene or arrive fashionably late. It was strategy. Callista always timed her media. She needed that buffer to post, pose, and control the narrative before anyone else could step in. When I pulled up to Liberty Marina, the parking lot shimmered under a high sun. My windows down, AC off. I didn't need cool air. I needed clarity. As I stepped out of the car, I adjusted the navy blazer, the same one I'd worn the day Richard and I signed our first vessel papers, same one I'd worn when the bank said yes, same one I'd worn when the first charter booking came through. This wasn't nostalgia, it was armor. In my right hand, I carried a small handbag. In my left, a ring of keys. The press was already there. I recognized 2 photographers from lifestyle blogs, women in floral dresses taking photos of champagne glasses, name cards, and Callista's smile. She stood on the lower deck, arms open as if she were christening the sea itself. Not one person looked toward the marina entrance. Not yet. Each step down the dock was a beat in my chest. The sound of heels meeting wood, the sway of the water beneath, the cry of a gull overhead. It was all symphonic. I walked like I owned the tide, because I did. I paused 20 feet from the ramp. Security shifted when they saw me. A younger man stepped forward, clipboard in hand, clearly rehearsed to screen guests. "Ma'am, this is a private." "She's clear," said a voice behind him. A steward, older, with a face I knew from my early training days. He gave me a small nod, then disappeared into the cabin without another word. I waited. Moments later, Captain Miller himself emerged, straight-backed, calm, neutral. But his eyes held something else, recognition and maybe relief. "Miss Shipman," he said with precision, "we weren't expecting you until later." I raised the keys slightly. Change of plans. Callista saw me then. Her smile didn't fall. It snapped. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her hands stilled mid-gesture, as if paused in some invisible choreography. Guests around her noticed the shift. Trenton turned. A cousin stared. I walked forward, stopped at the base of the gangway, and handed the keys to the steward. "It's a lovely morning to inspect my yacht, isn't it?" I said, loud enough for every whisper to freeze. Silence is heavier when it's deserved. Captain Miller stepped aside. "Of course, Miss Shipman. Welcome aboard." I ascended the ramp without hurry. My heels met teak. My eyes scanned the crowd. No one moved. Some avoided eye contact. Others couldn't look away. Midway up, I paused, turned. "Let's get one thing clear before we sail," I said calmly. I was never just a passenger. The wind caught the edge of my blazer as I turned again, stepped fully onto the deck, and walked with intention. through the entryway, past the floral arrangement I hadn't approved, and into the control room. Captain Miller followed. He closed the door behind us. "She requested complete privacy for the week," he said, "but we've made no operational changes." I nodded. "Good. Don't change anything. Yet. Keep the crew professional. No tension. Let the show go on." His expression flickered. "Ms. Shipman, with all due respect, why now?" I met his eyes. "Because they planned a perfect launch party," I said. "On a yacht they didn't realize already had its captain." He said nothing, just gave a single respectful nod. I looked out through the control room window at the guests below, still frozen in place, the photographers no longer snapping. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own legacy. I felt like the storm they never accounted for. The late afternoon sun cast everything in gold. Guests had gathered on the top deck, drinks in hand, white linens fluttering just slightly in the breeze. I stood off to the side, untouched glass of champagne in my hand, eyes steady on the woman I used to call daughter. Callista clinked her glass with the side of her fork and smiled. Perfect posture, poised tone. "Family," she began, "isn't about perfection. It's about forgiveness." Her voice trembled, just enough to feel authentic to anyone who didn't know better. "I'm so grateful. My mother chose to surprise us. That she's here with us now, it means more than I can say." Applause followed. Not thunderous, but polite. A few murmured, "That's sweet," and "She's so gracious." I didn't clap. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. She wasn't welcoming me. She was absorbing me, reframing the story while the cameras still pointed in her direction. And then, out of the crowd, Edric Warner approached. A tall man with white hair and a handshake that still carried weight. A former investor. Someone who remembered the beginning before Callista ever learned how to brand a dream. "Lorraine," he said, firmly but warmly, taking my hand with both of his. "It's good to see you again. I had a hunch that was still your ship under all the polish." His words caught me off guard. I hadn't expected to feel anything, but something in my chest loosened. "You built this," he added, eyes twinkling. "I recognize your signature in every seam." I didn't let the tear form. I just nodded. "Not everyone remembers." "I do," he said, then gave a small wink and turned back toward the crowd. I watched as Edric stepped beside Callista during her second round of greetings. He lifted his glass. "I'd just like to say," he began, "what an incredible vessel this is. Every detail, from the paneling to the name choice, pure Lorraine Shipman. She created something special here years ago. I'm glad we all get to enjoy the fruits of her vision." Callista's smile froze, then wavered, just slightly, enough that I caught it, even if no one else did. A few guests shifted. Someone whispered. One man raised an eyebrow and murmured, "I thought it was her daughter's company." Callista turned gracefully, brushing Edric's shoulder. "Of course. My mother was the original inspiration," she said with a gentle laugh. "But as you know, visions evolve." Not everyone was convinced. Later, as I stepped inside for a break from the soft music and softer praise, I felt her behind me. The corridor to the galley was narrow and dim, but private. She reached me before I could round the corner. "You're embarrassing me," she hissed. I turned slowly. "I haven't said a word. You didn't have to. You showed up with an agenda. You could have just let me have this." "This?" I said, tilting my head. "You mean the yacht? The moment? The narrative? You're twisting this." "No, Callista," I said calmly. You did that the moment you made it about optics instead of truth." She didn't reply. She didn't storm off either. She just stared at me, mouth slightly open, eyes blinking faster than usual. Then, without another word, she turned and disappeared into the shadows of her carefully lit evening. I took my time getting back to the lounge. The hallway buzzed with quiet chatter, and as I passed, I heard someone whisper, "Look at this. There's an article from 2014. Says Lorraine Shipman founded Seaborn Legacy. Even shows a photo of the original Azure." I didn't stop. I didn't smile. I walked right past them all, my shoes making soft but solid contact with the polished deck. One step, then another, louder than any toast Callista could offer. They were sipping cocktails on a story they never owned, and I was just getting to the first chapter. Dinner was scheduled for 7. Guests filtered into the main salon just after 6:30, drawn in by soft jazz and the promise of a curated family legacy video montage. Callista had arranged the presentation herself. Of course she had. I slipped away to my stateroom minutes earlier, the envelope already in my hands. Opening night, it read. Inside were 3 items. A printed thread of emails confirming every step of Callista's erasure campaign, a USB loaded with a short voiceover and one particular recording, and a signed contract, my name in bold, legally securing my ownership of Seaborn Legacy and Azure Majesty. No drama, no panic, just facts. I walked to the Yacht's audiovisual console and handed the USB to Marco, our tech lead. "Play this when the lights dim," I said. No delay, no explanation. He raised a brow but didn't argue. "Yes, Miss Shipman." By the time I returned to the main salon, the seats were mostly full. Soft laughter, tinkling glasses, a well-dressed lie in motion. I stood near the back, not hidden, but not highlighted either. That was always Callista's trick. Let me exist as set decoration, not substance. The lights dimmed, the projector whirred softly to life. For the first few seconds, a quiet murmur of confusion rippled through the room. This wasn't the slideshow Callista had described. There were no professional drone shots or posed family portraits. Instead, grainy photos of a younger me flickered on screen, hands smeared with oil on deck one summer, shaking hands with our first clients, hugging Richard by the helm. Then came my voice. This vessel was built from risk, from selling a house most said I was a fool to let go of, from weekends in boots, not heels, from blueprints spread across a kitchen table and arguments over how many engines we could afford. This is legacy, not curated, not crafted by PR. Lived. A pause, then audio. "Just keep Mom off the guest list. She's not on brand." Callista's voice. Flat, businesslike. The room went completely still. Even the hum of the projector seemed quieter. Silence is rarely this loud. A woman gasped. Somewhere a chair creaked. Someone whispered, "Did she really say that?" The screen faded to black. The music didn't resume. No one moved. I took a step forward. "I didn't need a toast," I said clearly, voice steady. "Just the truth." Callista stood frozen near the front, hands at her sides. Trenton's face was a blend of confusion and dawning guilt. One cousin looked down at her lap, pretending to study a napkin. No one clapped. No one said a word. I turned and made my way to the exit. The projector still cast a faint glow on the wall behind me, like the after image of a lightning strike. As I passed Callista, she opened her mouth, maybe to explain, maybe to beg, maybe to lie again. I didn't give her the chance. "I'll be in the captain's quarters," I said softly. "I trust you can handle dessert." Then I walked out, leaving behind the echo of truth, and a silence none of them could edit. I closed the door to my stateroom with the softest push, not wanting to hear it click. Quiet felt sacred now, not fragile, sacred. The kind of quiet that doesn't ask questions or demand space. It just holds you. I brewed tea, not because I wanted warmth, but because I needed something to do with my hands. I let the steam rise in front of my face and watched it disappear. Voices echoed faintly through the hallway outside, distant, distorted, not the kind of chatter that follows a celebration. These were the low murmurs of people rethinking everything they thought they knew, a kind of social nausea. I took a slow sip. I didn't need to hear them fall apart. That wasn't the goal. I just needed them to stop pretending I was never there. A soft knock interrupted the stillness. When I opened the door, Peter stood there, hands in his pockets. His voice matched the weight of the night. "Ms. Shipman, can I come in for a minute?" I nodded, stepping aside. He didn't sit, just stood near the window, eyes fixed on the horizon, like it might offer him the right words. "I wanted you to know," he began. Some of us on staff, we overheard things weeks ago." I set my teacup down. "Overheard?" "Callista told her team not to mention your name. Not in briefings, not to guests, not even in passing. Said it would muddy the branding if people knew the real history of the yacht." I didn't flinch. Peter glanced down. "We knew it wasn't right, but we didn't know what we could say or to who. You're saying it now." He looked relieved, but ashamed. I want you to know," he added, voice quiet. "We know who you are. We always did. And tonight, everyone else knows too." After he left, I slipped on a sweater and stepped into the hallway. The energy had shifted. Guests passed me with downcast eyes or awkward smiles. One offered a soft good evening but didn't stop to talk. I walked past Callista's stateroom and heard her crying through the closed door. But it wasn't grief, it was panic. The kind of crying that comes when a mask breaks. A staff member whispered in the pantry, unaware I was nearby. Her sponsor pulled out, right after the video, canceled next quarter's campaign. I kept walking. Reaching the upper deck, I checked my phone. A new message waited. From Trenton. I had no idea how deep it went. I should have asked. "I'm sorry, Mom." I didn't type anything back. Not yet. But I didn't delete it either. Instead, I went to my closet and changed into the navy silk robe I'd packed for this cruise and nearly left untouched. It felt cool against my skin, familiar. I stepped outside again, this time with no shoes, no armor. The stars stretched wide above the ocean like scattered truths, silent but present. I leaned against the railing and let the salt air settle deep in my chest. Let the night be quiet. I'd said enough. Now let the truth speak on its own. The sky the next morning was the kind of gray that didn't promise rain, only reflection. I stepped onto the deck, wrapped in my robe, the breeze cool against my skin, the salt air thicker than usual. The hush wasn't just weather, it was weight. No one brought up the video, not over breakfast, not in passing, but it sat there, unspoken between every polite nod and forced smile. Crew members moved a little slower. Guests stirred their coffee longer. The silence had grown roots. I settled into a chair in the corner of the breakfast deck, content to sit in the space no one seemed willing to fill. That's when Maisie, in her jelly sandals and tangled hair, plopped down beside me with a plate of toast and a handful of crayons. She colored quietly for a few minutes. Then, without looking up, she asked, "Why doesn't the article say, 'You're my grandma'?" I glanced over. She added, "I thought you were the boat lady." I watched her shade in a sun with orange and yellow lines. "Sometimes," I said softly, "stories skip important pages." Maisie squinted at her drawing. "That's silly. It's a bad story if you leave out the best parts." And just like that, truth came out of the mouth of someone too young to spell manipulation. I didn't reply. I just reached over and offered her the blue crayon she was missing. From the far end of the deck, I saw Callista. She looked rested, the way a politician does after a scandal, polished but not whole. She approached slowly, wearing a smile that couldn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning," she said, her voice bright, controlled. I nodded. "Morning." She paused, then looked at Maisie. "I see you found Grandma," she said too cheerfully. Maisie didn't look up. "She never left." Callista's lips twitched. "I meant for breakfast." She turned back to me. "I was going to ask if you had a moment to talk later." I folded my napkin. "There's no need. Some things speak louder when you stay silent." She blinked, hesitated, then stepped away without a word. The only sound between us was the scrape of a chair as she joined another table. Later, while walking the lower deck, I passed 2 guests near the bar. They weren't trying to whisper. "I heard 3 sponsors dropped out," one said. "Not surprised," the other replied. "You can only polish fiction so far before it turns to farce." I didn't flinch. Didn't smile either. I simply kept walking. Back in my suite, a printed social media post sat open on my tablet, something one of the crew had casually shown me. A photo from 2 days ago. Callista, holding a champagne flute on the deck, captioned, "Building Legacy, one horizon at a time." The post had been quietly deleted sometime overnight. I turned off the screen. Around 3 in the afternoon, I returned to the room after a nap and found a folded note on my pillow. My name was written in neat cursive on the front, the kind of deliberate handwriting used when someone wants to sound warm but cautious. "Family dinner tonight. Your presence would mean a lot. Callista." No fanfare, no apology, just a request. I sat on the edge of the bed and unfolded the paper again. Not because I hadn't read it clearly the first time, but because I was listening to the space between the lines. A framed photo of Richard and me leaned quietly on the nightstand. He was smiling in it, hand on the wheel, eyes squinting from the sun. We'd taken that shot the week we launched our second yacht. We had no press, no sponsors, no strategy, just trust. I folded the note and placed it beside the photo. "It depends what they're serving," I said to the room. "Truth or image?" The dining room had been transformed. Linen-draped tables, candles flickering inside glass holders, place cards, hand-lettered and spaced with intent. But the room wasn't filled with guests, just family, a tight circle, pulled in under the guise of intimacy, or maybe containment. I stood at the entrance long enough to be noticed. Callista looked up first, her face unreadable, then gestured toward the seat at the head of the table. No speeches, no introductions, just a quiet expectation. I walked over and sat, not out of acceptance, but acknowledgement. Trenton sat to my left, Maisie beside him, humming softly to herself as she traced the rim of her water glass. Across the table, 2 cousins I hadn't spoken to. Altrip kept their eyes low, polite but detached. Callista remained at the far end, posture perfect, lips closed. The meal began in silence. Trenton cleared his throat somewhere between salad and the main course. "I just wanted to say," he began, "you built something powerful, Mom, and I wish I'd asked about it sooner." I didn't look at him right away. I didn't need to. My voice was even. Sometimes silence speaks louder than celebration. He nodded, folding and unfolding his napkin. No one else chimed in. Maybe they didn't know how. It was later, when the dessert plates were being cleared, that Callista finally spoke. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. It didn't beg. "I was wrong," she said. "I didn't want people to see how much of me came from you." The air seemed to hold its breath. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let it hang long enough to feel real. Then I replied, "I didn't want credit. I wanted to matter." She looked down. Her eyes shimmered, but no tears fell. I didn't reach for her hand. I didn't offer comfort. Not because I was angry anymore, but because comfort without clarity was just another performance. I stood and walked to where Maisie sat. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and still. I bent and hugged her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, the only warmth I offered that evening. Then I turned to the room. "If you're going to use the word legacy from now on," I said, "use it honestly." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I walked out, the sound of my shoes against the hardwood floor, more commanding than any toast could have been. Back in my room, I changed into pajamas and sat by the window. The sea was calm. The sky was clear. The story was nearly over. I opened my notebook, the one I hadn't written in since before this trip, and flipped to the first blank page. "There is healing in truth," I wrote slowly, "not in image. There is peace in release, not in perfection." I picked up a pen, circled the word departure on my calendar. Sometimes the only reunion worth having is with yourself. The sun hadn't yet risen when I stepped onto the bow. The sea held its breath. The water still and glassy beneath the horizon blushed faintly pink. There were no cameras, no murmurs, no forced smiles, just the hush of dawn and me. I had once believed I needed a reckoning, something loud, public, final. But now, barefoot on the same deck where I had once sanded railings and patched sails, I understood. It was never about revenge. It was about remembering who I am. I went back inside and zipped my small suitcase. There wasn't much. A navy blazer, 2 sundresses, a notebook, Richard's anchor pin. Everything else could be mailed, sold, or forgotten. I moved slower than usual, not because of age or stiffness, but intention. I was no longer rushing toward anything. I was walking out of something. I left a folded note on the desk. "As Your Majesty" was never about revenge. It was about remembering who I am. Beside it, untouched, was the invitation card Callista had left for next year's cruise. I didn't toss it. I didn't keep it. I just let it sit, another prop in a story I no longer had to carry. As I stepped off the ship, the morning light stretched across the dock like a new page. A few crew members stood nearby. No one clapped, no one bowed. They just nodded, with respect, not pity. One young steward, maybe 20 at most, pressed a seashell into my palm. Not a word passed between us. He simply turned and continued with his work. I looked down at the shell, the ridges rough and sun-bleached. Trenton stood a little farther down, hands in his pockets, eyes lowered. When he looked up, our eyes met for a single breath. He gave a quiet wave. I nodded once and kept walking. Callista wasn't there, and that felt right. At the marina gate, Amanda waited with 2 cups of coffee. She handed me one without asking, like she'd done 100 times before when we used to plan launch schedules and staffing gaps together. "Want me to put anything on the calendar next week?" she asked. I smiled, not wide, but full. Yes, sailing alone, no itinerary. She chuckled, then stopped. You okay? I glanced out at the slips, some empty, some full, some waiting to be cleaned, all waiting to be used. For the first time in years, I didn't see them as vessels of pressure or proof. I'm better than okay, I said. We stood there a minute longer, the sea behind us, Naples waking slowly around us. And then I turned and walked toward my car, the suitcase rolling behind me, the breeze pulling at my hair like a gentle nudge forward. Later that afternoon, after unpacking, after making a simple lunch, I sat at my kitchen table and opened my tablet. A draft blog post blinked on the screen, half-titled, untouched for weeks. How I got kicked off my family cruise and found my own horizon. I stared at the cursor, blinking in rhythm with the quiet pulse in my chest. Then I began to type. They tried to define success. I chose to define myself. Sometimes the legacy we leave isn't the one our children carry, but the one we carry ourselves, even when no one else recognizes it. I used to believe that silence was strength. Now I know silence is choice, but truth is power. We don't need approval to be valid or applause to matter. What we build with love, sacrifice, and vision cannot be erased by anyone else's version of success. So let me ask you, have you ever been written out of a story you helped build? What did you do next? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched something in you, drop a 1 below or share where you're watching from. If it didn't sit right, tell me why. It matters. And hey, if you want more stories like this, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. We're just getting started.